If this design really is from the 1800s, then we may be misunderstanding what that era's technology could do. And if it looks ahead of its time, then the question isn't only how, it's when. The first time you notice it, it looks like a mistake. An old photograph of a railcar, dated to the late 1800s. The body is heavy and riveted, like you'd expect. But the undercarriage doesn't match. The suspension looks unusually compact. The wheel assembly appears engineered to sit lower than typical steam-era cars, almost like it was designed around a different kind of vibration. Not the vibration of steam. And the strangest detail is the roofline. It suggests a sealed interior, not a drafty wooden cabin. If this is just 19th century rail, why does it resemble something built for speed, stability, and containment? And if it's that advanced, why does the photo's caption treat it like normal? The official explanation is simple. Historians will say late 1800s rail design evolved fast, especially in industrial regions. Better metallurgy, mass production, standardized gauges. Railroad companies competed, so cars improved. Air brakes, improved couplers, stronger frames. A few rare designs look modern because we're used to seeing only the crude examples. That explanation accounts for some things, but not this. What's missing here is a clear line of development. Where are the prototypes that lead to these specific shapes? Where are the patent trails that match the exact assemblies seen in some of these images? If the design is experimental, why do we see it repeating across separate collections, often with similar proportions, similar window spacing, similar undercarriage geometry? And why do so many of these photos feel strangely decontextualized, as if they're showing a machine without showing the system that made it? At a certain point, you stop looking at style and start looking at scale. Many of these railcars, especially those in photos labeled as Tartarian by modern alternative history communities, appear built with a kind of precision that doesn't sit comfortably with the rough working conditions described in common accounts of 1800s infrastructure. Doorways look tall and functional, not decorative. Steps align like they were meant for repeated use, not occasional access. Window frames appear uniform in a way that suggests machine tooling, not hand variation. Even the spacing between components raises questions. Some underframes show a clean symmetry. Some bogies look engineered around load distribution in a way that feels ahead of the trial and error narrative. You can argue that skilled craftsmen did this. But the question isn't whether people were skilled. The question is why these features appear standardized, as if they came from an established manufacturing language that doesn't show up in the usual timelines. Once you notice it in one place, it becomes harder to ignore elsewhere. Railcar photos from different archives show the same odd design choices. Rounded roof edges that look like they're meant to channel airflow, not shed rain. Evenly repeated rivet patterns that imply precise templates. And platform connections that resemble later vestibule concepts, even when the caption claims it's an early model. Then there's the way certain depots and stations appear in the background. High masonry arches, oversized entrances, repeating columns. Some structures look more like civic halls than utilitarian rail facilities. And when you look closely, the architectural language often matches what people online call Tartarian. Ornate, heavy stone, tall windows, sometimes domed features. It doesn't mean anything by itself, but it raises a pattern question. Why does rail infrastructure in these images often appear embedded in monumental architecture, as if the rail system wasn't an add-on to a growing nation, but part of something older and already organized? If you try to verify this through records, that's where the tone changes. You find references to surveys, route maps, and engineering reports. You also find sudden gaps. Some early documents exist only as later reprints. Some station plans appear as simplified diagrams when you'd expect detailed drafts. In some regions, the earliest photographs are abundant, but the construction paperwork is thin. That silence is not an accusation. It's just a condition of the archive. What's missing here is continuity. For systems that supposedly expanded through private enterprise, you'd expect layers of paperwork, contractors, suppliers, shipments, manufacturing notes. But when researchers chase the details behind certain advanced-looking designs, the trail often doesn't end in a clear factory story. It ends in a label, a museum caption, catalog number, a brief line that says circa 1880s. Like the date is enough to close the case. And if these designs were common enough to photograph, why are they so uncommon to explain? There's another detail that keeps repeating, and it's easy to overlook. In many of these images, the environment looks too clean for the story being told. Rails appear laid through areas that should still be raw. Platforms look finished. Stonework looks aged. Sometimes the tracks pass through landscapes that don't show the expected chaos of expansion. No piles of materials, no temporary scaffolds, no visible staging. That doesn't mean the photo is fake, but it creates a strange impression, as if the railcar is arriving into a world that already had infrastructure waiting. Then, at a certain point in the timeline, the record feels like it shifts. The designs become simpler. The photos become more standardized. The architecture in the background changes tone. Grand masonry stations still exist, but the emphasis moves toward practical sheds, metal trusses, and straightforward brick. In catalogs, the language becomes more uniform. The same kinds of cars are described in a tighter industrial vocabulary. It's like a line gets drawn, and everything before it becomes early, primitive, or experimental. Even when some of it doesn't look primitive at all. This is the disappearance event, not because the trains vanish, but because the oddness does. The archive becomes easier, cleaner, more explainable, and the question becomes uncomfortable. What kind of event causes a clean break in how a technology is documented? If you stay with the Tartarian angle, there's a temptation to jump to conclusions. But you don't have to. You can stay with the evidence itself. Photographs of railcars with unexpected design language, stations with oversized, almost ceremonial architecture, and a paper trail that often feels like it's summarizing rather than describing. The unsettling part is that none of these elements are individually impossible. Engineers can be brilliant. Old buildings can be grand. Archives can be incomplete. But when the same tensions repeat, advanced form, monumental setting, thin explanation, you start to wonder if the official story is telling you what happened, or only what survived. And then you notice another thing. Many of these images rarely show crowds. You might see a few figures for scale, but the scenes often feel strangely empty. A machine meant to move masses, photographed in spaces built for large flows of people, with very few people present. Maybe it's just timing. Maybe the photographer wanted clean shots. But it raises a quiet question. Who was the system built for, and when was it actually used at full capacity? If these rail designs really exceeded what we assume the 1800s could produce, then the mystery isn't only how. It's where did the capability go, and why does the record stop asking? Another question sits beneath all of it. If a culture had a mature engineering language, standardized parts, repeatable designs, infrastructure that looks pre-planned, you would expect that culture to leave a consistent trail. Schools, manuals, factories, named engineers, disputes, improvements, competing patents. Instead, what you often find are artifacts without parents. A railcar with advanced features, but no clear lineage. A station that looks older than the town around it. A route that appears on later maps, but the early survey data is hard to locate. And a general confidence in the timeline, even when the physical objects feel out of step with it. So here are the questions that don't resolve cleanly. Why do some 1800s railcars appear designed around stability and containment, as if they anticipated higher speeds or smoother power delivery. Why do rail stations in some regions resemble monumental civic buildings, with entrances and arches that seem built for volumes of movement not reflected in the surrounding settlement? Why does the documentation around certain designs collapse into vague dating, while other industrial inventions of the same period are obsessively recorded? And when the design language becomes simpler later, is that progress? Or is it a change in what was allowed to remain visible? Maybe these are just coincidences. Maybe we're seeing selective photography. Maybe we're comparing rare examples against a mainstream average. But the strange part is how often the question returns after you think you've dropped it. Because once you start viewing these train designs not as early attempts, but as leftovers, objects that don't fully belong to the story we repeat, then the 1800s stops feeling like the beginning of something. It starts feeling like the afterimage of something already in motion. History usually explains its machines. These machines are still explaining history to us. If you've seen examples like this, or you've noticed similar gaps in the record, you can leave what you found in the comments. And if you want to stay with this investigation as it unfolds, you can like the video and subscribe.